Raised here. My family's third generation. My grandparents moved here in the early 1900s, and well, we basically had three. My daughter makes it 4 generations. Yeah, quite a while. It's a good place to live. Good people, lots of space. Now, all the towns in southern Wyoming are laid out and spaced out, you know, because the railroad came through. It was about how far they could go before they had to refuel. And, you know, Laramie was a major stopping point. That's why the towns are spaced so far apart. You know, we're one of the largest states and least populated.
There's so much space between people and towns here, so much time for reflection.
Rebecca Hilliker, head of the theater department at the University of Wyoming.
You have an opportunity to be happy in your life here. I found that people here were nicer than in the Midwest, where I used to teach, because they were happy. They were glad the sun was shining, and it shines a lot here.
What you have here is you have your old-time traditional rancher types. And, you know, they've been here forever. Laramie's sort of been, you know, the hub of where they went for their supplies and stuff like that.
Stewardship is one thing all our ancestors taught us.
Eileen Ingen, rancher.
If you don't take care of the land, then you ruin it and you lose your living. So you first of all have to take care of your land and do everything you can to improve it.
I love it here.
Doc O'Connor, limousine driver.
You couldn't put me back in that mess out there back east. Best thing about it is the climate. The cold, the wind. They say the Wyoming wind will drive a man insane. But you know what? It doesn't bother me. Well, some of the times it bothers me, but most of the time it don't.
And then you got the university population.
I moved here after living in a couple of big cities.
Philip Dubois, president of the University of Wyoming.
I loved it there, but you'd have to be out of your mind to let your kids out after dark. And here, in the summertime, my kids play at night till 11 o'clock, and I don't even think twice about it.
And then you have the people who live in Laramie, basically.
I moved here from rural Texas. Now, in Laramie, if you don't know a person, you will definitely know someone they know. So it can only be by 1 degree removed at most. And for me, I love it. I mean, I love to go to the grocery store because I get to visit 4 or 5 or 6 people every time I go. And I don't really mind people knowing my business because what's my business? I mean, my business is basically good.
I like trains, too. They don't bother me. Well, some of the times they bother me, but most of the time they don't. Even though one goes by every 13 minutes out where I live.
Doc actually lives in Bossler, but everybody in Laramie knows him. He's also not really a doctor.
They used to carry cattle, them trains. Now all they carry is diapers and cars.
I grew up in Cody, Wyoming.
April Silva, university student.
Laramie is a better place than where I grew up. I'll give it that.
It's a good place to live. Good people, lots of space. Now, when the incident happened with that boy, a lot of press came up here. And, you know, one time, some of them followed me out to the site, and, well, it was a beautiful day. You know, absolutely gorgeous day, real clear. The sky was that blue, you know, just gorgeous. That blue that, you'll never be able to paint it. It's just sky blue. You know, it's gorgeous. You got the mountains in the background and a little bit of snow on them. And, you know, this one reporter, lady, person, well, she says to me,
Well, who found the boy? Who was out here anyway?
and I said, well, this is a really popular area for, you know, people to run, and mountain biking's really big out here, and horseback riding. Well, it's really close to town. And she looks at me and she says,
Who in the hell would want to run out here?
I'm thinking, lady, you're missing the point. You're just missing the whole gosh darn point. You know, all you got to do is you turn around and you see the mountains, you smell the air, you listen to the birds, you take in what's around you. And they were just nothing but the story. You know, I didn't feel judged. I thought they were stupid. You know, they're missing the point. They're missing the whole darn point.
It's hard to talk about Laramie now, to tell you what Laramie is for us.
Jedediah Schultz.
If you would have asked me before, I would have told you Laramie's a beautiful town, secluded enough that you can have your own identity, a town with a strong sense of community. Everyone knows everyone, a town with a personality that most larger cities are stripped of. Now, after Matthew, I would say that Laramie is a town defined by an accident, a crime. We've become Waco. We've become Jasper. We're a noun, a definition, a sign. We may be able to get rid of that, but it sure will take a while.
Journal entries. Members of the company. Andy Paris.
Moises called and sent the idea for his next theater project, but there was a somberness to his voice. So I asked what it was all about, and he told me he wanted to do a piece about what's been happening in Wyoming.
Stephen Belber.
Lee told me the company was thinking of going out to Laramie to conduct interviews and that they wanted me to come. But I'm hesitant. I have no real interest in prying into a town's unraveling.
Amanda Gronick.
I've never done anything like this in my life. How do you get people to talk to you? What do you ask?
Moises Kaufman.
The company has agreed that we should go to Laramie for a week and interview people. I'm a bit afraid about taking 10 people in a trip of this nature. Must be some safety rules. No one works alone. Everyone carries cell phones. Have made some preliminary contacts with Rebecca Hilliker, head of the theater department at the University of Wyoming. She's hosting a party for us our first night in Laramie and has promised to introduce us to possible interviewees.
I must tell you that when I first heard that you were thinking of coming here, when you first called me, I wanted to say you just kicked me in the stomach. Why are you doing this to me? But then I thought, that's stupid. You're not doing this to me. And more importantly, I thought about it and decided that we've so much negative closure on this thing. And the students really need to talk. When this happened, they started talking about it, and then the media descended and all dialogue stopped. You know, I really love my students because they are free thinkers. You may not like what they have to say, and you may not like their opinions because they can be very redneck, but they are honest and they're truthful. So there's an excitement there. There's a dynamic here with my students that I never had when I was in the Midwest or in North Dakota, because there was so much Puritanism that dictated how people looked at the world that a lot of times they didn't have an opinion. You couldn't get them to express an opinion. And quite honestly, I'd rather have opinions that I don't like and have that dynamic in education. There's a student I think you should talk to. His name is Jedediah Schultz.
I've lived in Wyoming my whole life. The family has been in Wyoming, well, for generations. Now, when it came time to go to college, my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. I wanted to study theater, and I knew that if I was going to go to college, I was going to have to get a scholarship. And so they have this competition each year, this Wyoming State High School competition, and I knew that if I didn't take first place in duets, that I wasn't going to get a scholarship. So I went to the theater department of the university looking for good scenes. And I asked one of the professors, I was like, I need a killer scene. And he was like, here you go. This is it. And it was from Angels in America. So I read it and I knew that if I could win, that I could win best scene if I did a good enough job. And when it came time, I told my mom and dad so that they would come to the competition. Now, you have to understand, my parents go to everything, every ball game, every hockey game, everything I've ever done. And they brought me into their room and told me that if I did that scene, that they would not come to see me in the competition because they believed that it is wrong, that homosexuality is wrong. They felt that strongly about it that they didn't want to come see their son do probably the most important thing in his life up to that point. And I didn't know what to do. I had never, ever gone against my parents' wishes. so I was kind of worried about it. But I decided to do it. And all I can remember about the competition is that when we were done, me and my scene partner, we came up to each other, we shook hands, and there was a standing ovation. Oh man, it was amazing. We took first place and we won. And that's how come I can afford to be here at the university, because of that scene. It's one of the best moments of my life, and my parents weren't there. And to this day, that was the one thing that my parents didn't see me do. And thinking back on it, I think, well, why did I do it? Why did I oppose my parents? Because I'm not gay, so why did I do it? And I guess the only honest answer I can give is that, well, I wanted to win. It was such a good scene. It was like the best scene. Do you know Mr. Kushner? Maybe you can tell him.
Greg Perotti.
I met today with two longtime Laramie residents, Allison Mears and Marge Murray, who taught me a thing or two.
Well, what Laramie used to be like when Marge was growing up, well, it was mostly rural.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed it, you know. My kids all had horses.
Well, there was more land. I mean, you could keep your pet cow and your horse and your little chickens, you know, just have your little bit of acreage.
Yeah, I could run around the house in my all-togethers, do the housework while the kids were at school, and nobody could see me. And if they got that close...
Well, then that's their problem.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I got the expression right. You're all togethers?
Well, yeah, honey. I mean, why? We're close.
Now, how's he going to use that in his play?
Oh.
So this was a big ranching town.
Oh, not just ranching. This was a big railroad town at one time before they moved everything to Cheyenne and Green River and Omaha. So now, well, it's just a drive-through spot for the railroad because even, what was it, in the 50s? Well, they had one big roundhouse, and they had such a shop they could build a complete engine.
They did. My mom worked there.
Your mom worked in a roundhouse?
Yeah, she washed engines. Her name was Minnie. We used to, you know, sing that song for her. You know, that song.
What song?
Run for the roundhouse, Minnie. They can't corner you there.
But I'll tell you, Wyoming is bad in terms of jobs. I mean, the university has the big whoop-de-doo jobs, but Wyoming, unless you're a professional, well, the bulk of the people are working minimum wage jobs.
Yeah, I've been in the service industry or bartending most of my life. Now, I know everybody in town.
And she does.
And I do. Now, that I'll tell you, here in Laramie, there is a difference, and there always has been. What it is a class distinction. It's about the well-educated and the ones that are not. And the educated ones don't understand why the ones that are not don't get educated. Well, that's why I told you before that my kids had to fight because their mother was a bartender. Never mind, I was the best damn bartender in town.
And she was.
Well, that's not bragging. That's fact.
But here in Laramie, if it weren't for the university, we'd just be SOL.
What's SOL?
Oh. Well, do I have to say it? Well, it's shit out of luck. Oh, Lordy, you got that on your tape. Boy, you are getting an education today.
Yeah, I guess I am. So let me ask you, what was your reaction when all of this happened to Matthew Shepard?
Well, I've been close enough to the case to know many of the people. I have a daughter who's on the sheriff's department. As far as the gay issue, I don't give a damn one way or the other, as long as they don't bother me. And even if they did, well, I'd just say, no thank you. And that's the attitude of most of the Laramie population. I mean, they might poke one if they were in a bar situation, you know, they'd been drinking. They might actually smack one in the mouth, but then they just walk away. Yeah, most of them said they would just say, I don't swing that way, and whistle on about their business. You know, Laramie is live and let live.
I'd say that Marge probably knows a lot more, except she's even willing to say, and we have to respect her for that.
Well, where are you going with this story?
Well, we haven't decided yet, but when we finish, we're probably going to bring it around to Laramie.
Okay, then. There are parts that I won't tell you.
Company member Andy Paris.
Today, for the first time, we met someone who actually knew Matthew Shepard. Trish Stager, owner of a shop in town, referred to him as Matt.
Matt used to come into my shop. That's how I knew him.
It was the first time I had heard heard him referred to as Matt instead of Matthew. Did he go by Matt to everyone?
Well, on the 2nd of October, I get a phone call about 10 after 7.
Doc O'Connor.
It was Matthew Shepard, and he said, "Can you pick me up at the corner of 3rd and Grand?" So anyhow, I pull up to the corner to see who, Matthew Shepard, you know? It's a little guy, about 5'2", soaking wet, I bet you 97 pounds tops. They say he weighed 110, but I wouldn't believe it. They also said he was about 5'5" in the newspapers, but this man was really only about 5'2", maybe 5'1". So he walks up to the window. I'm going to try and go in steps so you can get a better understanding of the principle of this man. So he walks up to the window, and I say, "Are you Matthew Shepard?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm Matthew Shepard, but I don't need you to call me Matthew or Mr. Shepard. I don't want you to call me anything. My name is Matt, and I want you to know I am gay, and we are going to a gay bar. Do you have a problem with that?" And I said, "How you paying?" The fact is, Laramie doesn't have any gay bars, and for that matter, neither does Wyoming. So he was hiring me to take him down to Fort Collins, Colorado, about half an hour away. Matt was a blunt little shit. You know what I'm saying? He always was. But I liked him because he was straightforward. You see what I'm saying? Maybe gay, but straightforward. You see what I'm saying?
I don't know. You know, how does any one person ever tell about another? You really should talk to my sister Romaine. She was a very close friend of Matthew's.
We never called him Matthew, actually. Most of the time we called him Choo Choo, you know, because we used to call him Matt Choo, and then we just called him Choo Choo. And whenever I think of Matthew, I always think of his incredible beaming smile. I mean, he'd walk in and he'd be like, you know, he'd smile at everyone. He made you feel great, and he would like stare people down in the coffee shop because he always wanted to sit in the end seat so that he could talk to me while I was working. And if someone was sitting in that seat, he would just sit there and stare at them till they left. Then he would claim his spot. But Matthew definitely had a political side to him. I mean, he really wanted to get into political affairs. That's all his big interest was, watching CNN and MSNBC. I mean, that's the only TV station I ever saw his TV tuned to. He was just really smart in political affairs, but not too smart in the common sense things. So he moves to Laramie to go to school.
Matthew was very shy when he first came in.
John Peacock, Matthew Shepard's academic advisor.
To the point of being somewhat mousy, I'd almost say. He was having some difficulties adjusting, but this was home for him, and he made that quite clear. And so his mousiness, his shyness, gave way to a person who was excited about this track that he was going to embark on. He was just figuring out, wanting to work on human rights, how he was going to do that. And when that happens, this person begins to bloom a little bit. He was starting to say, wow, there are opportunities here. There are things I can do in this world. I can be important.
I did hear from Matthew about 48 hours before his attack. And he told me that he had joined the gay and lesbian group on campus, and he said he was enjoying it. You know, he was getting ready for Pride Week and whatnot. I mean, he was totally stoked about school. Yeah, he was really happy about being there.
And in retrospect, and I can only say this in retrospect, of course, I think that's where he was heading, towards human rights, which only adds to the irony and the tragedy of this.
My understanding when I first came here,
Catherine Connolly,
is that I was the first out lesbian or gay faculty member on campus. And that was 1992, so that wasn't that long ago. I was asked at my interview what my husband did, and so I came out then. Do you want to hear a funny story? When you first get here as a new faculty member, there's all these things that you have to do. And so I was in my office, and I noticed that this woman had called. I was expecting, you know, some health insurance thing or whatnot. And so I called her back, and I could hear her. She was working on her keyboard, clicking away. I said, you know, this is Kathy Connolly returning your call. And she said, oh, it's you. And I thought, this is bizarre. And she said, I hear you're gay. I hear you are. And I was like, uh-huh. And she said, I hear you came as a couple. I'm one too. Not a couple, just a person. And so she was a kind of lesbian who knew that I was coming, and she wanted to come over and meet me immediately. And she later told me that there were other lesbians that she knew who wouldn't be seen with me, that I would irreparably taint them, that just to be seen with me could be a problem.
When I came here, I knew it was going to be hard as a gay man.
Jonas Slonica.
But, you know, I kept telling myself, people should live where they want to live. You know, and there would be times that I would go down to Denver and I would go to gay bars and, you know, people would ask where I was from and I'd say Laramie, Wyoming. And I met so many men down there from Wyoming, so many gay men who grew up here. And they're like, this is not a place where I can live. How can you live there? I had to get out. And once in a while, though, there would be a guy. And he'd say, oh, gosh, I miss Wyoming. You know, I mean, I really, really love it there. And they'd have this starry-eyed look in their eyes. And I'm like, if that's where you want to live, then do it. I mean, imagine if more gay people stayed in small towns. You know, but it's easier said than done.
Amanda Gronick.
Today, we divided up to go to different churches in the community. Moises and I were given a Baptist church. We were welcomed into the services by the Reverend himself, standing at the entrance to the chapel. This is what I remember of his sermon that morning.
My dear brothers and sisters, I am here today to bring you the word of the Lord. Now, I have a simple truth that I tell to my colleagues, and I'm going to tell it to you today. The word is either sufficient or it is not. Scientists tell me that human history, that the world is 5 billion or 6 billion years old. After all, what's a billion years, give or take? The Bible tells me that human history is 6,000 years old. The word is either sufficient or it is not.
Ah, the sociology of religion in the West.
Stephen Meade Johnson, Unitarian minister.
Dominant religious traditions in this town. Baptist, Mormon. They're everywhere. It's not just Salt Lake, you know. They're all over. They're like jam on toast down here.
The Mormon church has a little different thing going on that, well, that irritates some folks.
Doug Laws Stake, ecclesiastical leader of the Mormon church.
And that is that we absolutely believe that God still speaks to man. We don't think that it happened and some folks wrote it in the Bible. God speaks to us today, and we believe that. We believe that the prophet of the church has the authority to receive inspiration and revelation from God.
So, the spectrum would be on the left side of the panel, so far left that I'm probably sitting all by myself, is me, the Unitarian Church. Unitarians are by and large humanists, many of whom are atheists. I mean, we're not even sure we're a religion. And to my right on the spectrum, to his credit, Father Roger, Catholic priest, who is well established here, and God bless him, he did not equivocate when all this happened. He hosted the vigil for Matthew that night.
I was really jolted because, you know, when we did the vigil, we wanted to get other ministers involved. And we called some of them, and they would not get involved. And it was like, we are going to stand back and wait and see which way the wind is blowing. And that angered me immensely. We are supposed to stand out as leaders. I thought, wow, what's going on here?
God has set boundaries. And one of our responsibilities is to learn what is it that God wants. So you study Scripture, you look to your leaders, and you know what the bounds are. Now you kind of get a feel for what the bounds are, and well, then you sort of get a feel for what's out of bounds. You know, there was a proclamation that came out on the family. A family is defined as one woman, one man, and children. That's a family. It's about as clear as you can state it. You know, there's no sexual deviation in the Mormon church, no leniency. We think it's out of bounds.
I'll warn you, you will be mocked. You will be ridiculed for the singularity of your faith, but you let the Bible be your guide. It's in there. It's all in there.
The Christian pastors, many of the conservative ones, were silent on this. Conservative Christians use the Bible to show the rest of the world, it says here in the Bible! And most Americans believe, and they do, that the Bible is the Word of God. How are you going to fight that?
I am a biblicist, which means the Bible doesn't need me to be true. The Bible is true whether I believe it or not. The Word is either sufficient or it is not.
I arrived in Laramie on September 15th. I looked around, tumbleweed, cement factory, and I said, what the hell am I doing in Wyoming? 3 weeks later, I found out what the hell I was doing in Wyoming.
Company member, Stephen Belbin.
I had breakfast this morning with a university student named Zubaydah Ullah. She's an Islamic feminist who likes to do things her own way.
I've lived in Laramie since I was 4, yeah. My parents are from Bangladesh. 2 years ago, because I'm Muslim, I started wearing a scarf. That's really changed my life in Laramie, yeah. Like, people say to me things like, why do you have to wear that thing on your head? Like, when I go to the grocery store, I'm not looking to give people Islam 101. You know what I mean? So, well, I'll be like, well, it's part of my religion, and I'll be like, this is the worst part, because they'll be like, I know it's part of your religion, but why? And it's, how am I supposed to go through the whole doctrine of physical modesty and my own spiritual relationship with the Lord, standing there with my pop and chips? You know what I mean? Yeah. So, you know, it's unreal to me that, a group from New York would be writing a play about Laramie, and picturing, like, you're going to be in a play about my town. You're going to be on stage in New York, and you're going to be acting like you're us. That's so weird.
Hello?
Yes, hello. My name is Amanda Gronick, and I'm here in Laramie working with a theater company. I went to the Reverend's, your husband's church on Sunday, and I was extremely interested in talking to the Reverend about some of his thoughts about recent events.
Well, I don't think he'll want to talk to you. He has very biblical views about homosexuality. He doesn't condone that kind of violence, but he doesn't condone that lifestyle. You know what I mean? And he was just bombarded with the press after all this happened, and the media has been just terrible about the whole thing.
Oh, I know. I really understand. It must have been just terrible.
Oh, yes. I think we were all hoping this would just go away.
Well, do you think maybe I could call back and speak with your husband, just briefly?
Well, all right. You can call him back tonight at 9 o'clock.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll do that.
Today, Barbara and I went to the Fireside Bar, which is the last place where Matthew was seen in public.
The Fireside definitely feels like a college bar with a couple of pool tables and a stage area for karaoke night. Still, the few regulars in the late afternoon were hardly the college crowd.
First person we talked to was Matt Mickelson, the owner.
My great-grandfather moved here in 1862. He owned Laramie's first opera house. It was called Old Blue Front. And in 1870, Louisa Grandma Swain cast the first woman's ballot in any free election in the world. And that's why Wyoming is the equality state. So what I want to do is reestablish my bar business as Old Blue Front Opera House and Good Time Emporium. You know, I want to have a restaurant. I want to have a gift shop. I want to have a pool hall, and all the first step towards the Old Blue Front Opera House and Good Time Emporium.
So, what about the night Matthew Shepard was here?
We had karaoke that night, 20 or 30 people here. Matthew Shepard came in sitting right where you are now. Just hanging out. I mean, if you want to talk to somebody, you should talk to Matt Galloway. He was the kid that was bartending that night. You have to meet him. His character stands for itself. Hey, is Galloway bartending tonight?
Okay. I'm going to make this brief, quick, get it over with, but it'll be everything factual, just the facts. Here we go, 10 o'clock, I clock in, usual time, Tuesday nights, 10:30. Matthew Shepard shows up, sits alone, orders a Heineken.
Phil LeBrie, friend of Matthew Shepard.
Matt liked to drink Heineken and nothing else. Heineken, even though you got to spend $9.50 for a six-pack, he would always order the same beer.
So what can I tell you about Matt? If I had 100 customers like him, it'd be the most perfect bar I've ever been in, okay? And nothing to do with sexual orientation, manners, politeness, intelligence, taking care of me as in tips, everything, conversation, dress nice, clean cut. Some people, you know, just sits down, please, thank you, offers intellect, you know, within their vocabulary. So he kicks it there. Didn't seem to have any worries or like he was looking for anyone, just enjoying his drink and the company around. Now, approximately 11:45, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson come in. I didn't know their names then, but they're the accused. They're the perps. They're the accused. They walked in just very stone-faced, you know? Dirty, grungy, rude. Gimme! That type of thing. They walked up to the bar, as you know, paid for a pitcher with dimes and quarters, which is something, I mean, you don't forget. You don't forget that. $5.50 in dimes and quarters, it's a freaking nightmare. Now, Henderson and McKinney, they didn't seem intoxicated at all. They came in, just ordered a beer, took the pitcher back with them into the pool room, and kept to themselves. Next thing I knew, probably half hour later, they were walking around, no beer. I stayed and remembered, thinking to myself that I'm not going to ask them if they want another because obviously they just paid for a pitcher with dimes and quarters. I have a real good feeling they don't have any more money.
Romaine Patterson.
Money meant nothing to Matthew because he came from a lot of it. And he would like hand over his wallet in 2 seconds because money meant nothing. His shoes might have meant something. They can say it was robbery. I don't buy it. Not even for an iota of a second.
Then a few moments later, I looked over and Aaron and Russell were talking to Matthew Shepard.
Aaron said that a guy walked up to him and said that he was gay and wanted to get with Aaron and Russ.
Kristen Price, girlfriend of Aaron McKinney.
And that he got aggravated with it and told him that he was straight and didn't want anything to do with him and walked off. He said that is when he and Russell went to the bathroom and decided to pretend they were gay and get him in the truck and rob him.
Okay, no. They stated that Matt approached them, that he came on to them. I absolutely, positively disbelieve and refute the statement 100%. Refute it. I'm going to give you 2 reasons why. 1, character reference. Why would he approach them? Why them? When he wasn't approaching anyone else in the bar. They say he's gay, that he's a flaming gay. He's going to come on to people like that. Bullshit. He never came on to me. Hello? He came on to them? I don't believe it. 2, territorialism is the word I will use for this. And that's the fact that Matt was sitting there. Russell and Aaron were in the pool area. Upon the first interaction, they were in Matt's area, in the area Matt's been sitting in all night. So who's who approached who by them?
But Matthew, he was the kind of person, like, he would never not talk to someone for any reason. If someone started talking to him, he'd be like, oh, blah, 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 blah. He never had any problem just striking up a conversation with anybody.
You know, Matt did feel lonely a lot of times, and me knowing that and, you know, knowing how gullible Matt could be, he would have walked right into it. You know, the fact that he was out the bar alone without any friends, it just it made him that much more vulnerable.
So the thing is, and this is what I'm testifying to, because, you know, I'm basically the eyewitness in the case. Basically what I'm testifying is that I saw Matthew leave. I saw 2 individuals leave with Matthew. I didn't see their faces, but I saw the backs of their heads. At the same time, McKinney and Henderson were no longer around. You do the math.
Actually, I think the DJ was the last one to talk to him on his way out that night. Gave him a cigarette or something. His name is Shadow.
I was the last person that Matt talked to before he left the fireside. I was just bullshitting around with my shit, and he stopped me. I stopped him, actually. He's like, hey, Shadow, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, what, man? You getting ready to leave? He's like, yeah, man, and like that. But then I noticed them 2 guys, they stood outside. You could see it. They were standing there, you know, and he was looking up over at them, and they were looking back at him. And I stood, and I talked to Matt for a good 10 minutes, and you could see the guys with him. You know, you seen them getting getting worried, you know, like anxious to leave and shit. So when they took off, I seen it. When they took off, it was a black truck. It was a small truck, and the 3 of them sat in the front seat, and Matt sat in the middle. And I didn't think nothing of it, you know. I didn't figure them guys was going to be like that.
Stephen Meade Johnson.
The fence. I've been out there 4 times. I've taken visitors. That place has become a pilgrimage site. Clearly, it's a powerful personal experience to go out there. It's so dark and so empty. You can't help but think of Matthew there for 18 hours in nearly freezing temperatures, and that view up there isolated, and the, God, my God, why have you forsaken me, comes to mind.
Company member Greg Perotti.
Phil Labrie, a friend of Matthew's, he took us out to the fence this morning. You know, I broke down the minute I touched it. You know, I made such a strong kinship with this young man, and on the way back, I made sure nobody saw that I was crying.
Lee Fondakowski.
Greg was crying on the way back. I couldn't bring myself to tears, but I felt the same way. I have an interview this afternoon with Aaron Kreifels. He's the boy who found Matthew out there at the fence. I don't think I'm up to it right now. I'll see if somebody else can do it.
Aaron Kreifels.
Well, I took off on my bicycle about 5 p.m. on Wednesday from my dorm. I just kind of felt like going for a ride. So I went up to the top of Cactus Canyon, and I'm not super familiar with that area. So on my way back down, I didn't know where I was going. I was just sort of picking the way to go, you know, which it just makes me think maybe God wanted me to find him, because there's no way I was going to go that way. So I was in some deep-ass sand, and I wanted to turn around, but for some reason, I kept going. And I went along, and there was this rock in the ground, and I just drilled it. I went over the handlebars and up over and onto the ground, and I got up, and I just kind of dusted myself off, you know, and I was looking around, and I noticed something, which ended up being Matt, and he was just lying there by the fence, and I just thought it was a scarecrow. I was like, Halloween's coming up. I thought it was a Halloween gag, so I didn't think much of it. So I got my bike, and I walked it around the fence, and that was there. It was, you know, a buck type of fence. And I got closer to him, and I noticed his hair. That was the major key to me, noticing it was a human being, was his hair. Because I just thought it was a dummy. Seriously, I noticed, I even noticed the chest going up and down, and I thought, well, it's a dummy, you know? It's like some kind of mechanism. When I saw the hair, I knew it was a human being. So I ran to the nearest house, and I ran just as fast as I could, and I called the police.
I responded to the call.
Officer Reggie Flutie.
When I got there, at first, the only thing I could see was partially somebody's feet, and I got out of my vehicle and raced over. I seen what appeared to be a young man, 13, 14 years old, because he was so tiny, laying on his back, and he was tied to the bottom of a pole. I did the best I could. The gentleman that was laying on the ground, Matthew Shepard, he was covered in dry blood all over his head. There was dry blood underneath him, and he was barely breathing. He was doing the best he could. I was going to breathe for him, and I couldn't get his mouth open. His mouth wouldn't open for me. He was covered in, like I said, partially dried blood and blood all over his head. The only place that he did not have any blood on him, on his face, was what appeared to be where he'd been crying down his face. His head was distorted. You know, it didn't look normal. He looked as if he had a real harsh head wound.
I was working the emergency room the night Matthew Shepard was brought in. I don't think that any of us can remember seeing a patient in that condition for a long time. Those of us who've worked in big city hospitals have seen this. But we have some people here who've not worked in big city hospitals, and it's not something you expect here. You expect it. You expect this kind of injuries to come from a car going down a hill at 80 miles an hour. You expect to see gross injuries from something like that. This horrendous, terrible thing. But you don't expect to see that from someone doing this to another person. The ambulance report said it was a beating, so we knew.
There was nothing I could do. I mean, if there was anything that I could have done to help him, I would have done it, but there was nothing. And I was like yelling at the top of my lungs at him, trying to get him something out of him. Like, hey, wake up, hello! But he didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't anything.
He was tied to the fence. His hands were thumbs out in what we call a cuffing position, the way we handcuff people. He was bound with a real thin white rope and went around the bottom of the pole about 4 inches up off the ground. His shoes were missing. He was tied extremely tight, so I used my boot knife and tried to slip it between the rope and his wrist. I had to be extremely careful not to harm Matthew any further.
Your first thought is, well, certainly you'd like to think that it's somebody from out of town that comes through and beats somebody. I mean, things like this happen, you know, shit happens. And it happens in Laramie. But if there's been somebody who has been beaten repeatedly, certainly it is something that offends us. I think that's a good word. It offends us.
He was bound so tight. I finally got the knife through there. I'm sorry. We rolled him over to his left side. And when we did that, he quit breathing. Immediately, I put him back on his back. And that was just enough of an adjustment. It gave me room to cut him free there. I seen the EMS unit trying to get to the location. Once the ambulance got there, we put a neck collar on him, placed him on a backboard, and scooted him from underneath the fence. Then Rob drove the ambulance to Ivinson Hospital's emergency room.
Now, the strange thing is, 20 minutes before Matthew came in, Aaron McKinney was brought in by his girlfriend. Now, I guess he had gotten into a fight later on that night back in town, so I'm working on Aaron, and the ambulance comes in with Matthew. Now, at this point, I don't know that there's a connection at all. So I tell Aaron to wait, and I go and treat Matthew. So there's Aaron in one room of the ER, and Matthew in another, just 2 doors down. Now, as soon as we saw Matthew, it was obvious that his care was beyond our capabilities. Called the neurosurgeon at Poudre Valley, and he was on the road in 1 hour and 15 minutes, I think.
They showed me a picture. Days later, I saw a picture of Matthew. I would not have recognized him.
Then 2 days later, I found out the connection. I was very struck. I mean, they were 2 kids. They were both my patients, and they were 2 kids. I took care of both of them, of both their bodies, and for a brief moment, I wondered if this is how God feels when he looks down at us, how we are all his kids, our bodies, our souls. And I felt a great deal of compassion for both of them.